This lecture is on the means of examining the lungs in somebody who's alive. So we're going to begin with the venerable chest X-ray. And this can be used to detect abnormalities in the lung tissue, including scars, fluid accumulation, and distortion of the conducting passageways. So a chest X-ray just pointed at the chest of a live person then will give you a little bit of a picture of what is inside. Now, suppose you do a chest X-ray and you find something that you think doesn't look quite the way it should, but you'd like a closer look. Then there are CT scans, also known as CAT scans. It stands for computer-aided tomography. And these then can show basically greater definition. Compared to an X-ray. Then there are what are called lung scans. And these then can be made by injecting radioactive tracers. I'll get to that in a moment. Radioactive tracers, then, or by inhaling radioactive gas. These are both done in clinical settings. There is a whole field of medicine known as nuclear medicine that involves using radioactive substances as a part of imaging, or indeed as a part of medicine in general. So what's going on here is a radioactive tracer then is basically a little bit of radioactive fluid. And radioactivity will not necessarily harm you when used correctly. So, but basically what happens here with a radioactive tracer is that a little bit of a radioactive substance, probably tritiated water, will wind up being injected into somebody's bloodstream. And that then means that all of the blood vessels surrounding the lungs are going to light right up when you look at them. They do not literally glow in the dark, but the point is if you're looking at using various different mechanisms, then you will be able to see still greater definition of the surrounding blood vessels, which can be very useful at times. And the other way to go, if you want to look at the bronchial tree itself directly, then you can have that person inhale radioactive gas. And as that gas goes down through all the conducting passageways, then once again, you look at it with an X-ray or with a CAT scan, you will again see greater definition of the bronchial tree by means of using these radioactive helpers. So as I said, this is all done in clinical settings and it can be very useful. So, just to reiterate then, these can detect abnormalities in both airflow or pulmonary circulation. If you inhale the radioactive gas, you'll see the airflow very well. If you wind up having the radioactive tracer injection, then you will see the circulation in your pulmonary blood vessels very clearly. So that then is looking at the whole lung, the whole bronchial tree at once. We can also take close-ups. Okay, so suppose you saw something in that x-ray or in that CAT scan or something like that that you think looks worrisome, and you wish you could get a closer look at it. You wish you could look at the tissue itself. Now we can. So this then is done by way of bronchoscopy. So this then involves the insertion of a fiber optic bundle, essentially a tiny camera. And we're now talking about only a few millimeters in diameter. So we are inserting this tiny, tiny thread of a camera then into the trachea. And it is then steered along conducting passageways to the smaller bronchi. This is kind of amazing, really. And this permits direct visualization, which is kind of amazing. So direct visualization of bronchial structures. That's an of. So what this is basically saying is that you can insert this tiny camera into the trachea, steer it along. And remember what I said before. Let's suppose that on your CAT scan you saw something that you think looks suspicious. Maybe there's a little mass there. Maybe you suspect cancer, something So what can happen then is that you steer this little camera along the bronchial tree until you get to that suspicious looking area, and you are watching this whole thing on television so that you can actually see the sides of the tube and so on as this is going along. You get to this suspicious area and you can look at it very closely by way of the TV that the tiny camera is feeding into. And so you can then wind up seeing, as I said, the actual structures inside the bronchi this way. And suppose you get to that area that looks like it might be cancer or something like that. What do? You can then take a sample of the tissue so that you can take it back to the lab and culture it up and see what those cells really are. So bronchoscopes then can also take tissue samples. Along the way. So you have detected an abnormality on the bronchial tree. You can put in a bronchoscope and take a look at it up close. You can also take a sample of that specific tissue, which is also an amazing thing, so that you can find out what that specific tissue may have wrong with it. So then there is a different sort of a technique then called bronchography. So this is when a catheter or a bronchoscope introduces a radio opaque material. Okay, and we'll see a radio opaque material. Let's do this into the bronchi. So into all of those conducting passageways, you now have a radio opaque material. What do I mean by that? Okay, radio opaque material is a material that is opaque to X-rays. And so if you then inject that or you introduce that into your air passageways, then what's going to wind up happening is if you take an X-ray of that, then you will again get heavy, high-level definition of the bronchial tree, because suddenly all of those air tubes are going to stop the X-rays. And so you will then see the bronchial tree very, very clearly. So a radio opaque material is one then that is opaque to X-rays. If you wind up having that introduced to the bronchi, then the bronchi will show up very, very clearly in an X-ray. So this technique then can first permit detailed analysis of bronchial masses, basically things that don't look quite right in the bronchi. And it can also then help with detection of obstructions. Further along the bronchial tree. So as I said, by using this radio opaque material, you can wind up seeing bronchial masses better, or you can wind up then seeing obstructions that are a bit further along. And that is the end of this lecture on means of examining the lungs while alive.